Okay, I think now it's working. Okay, I think now it's working. Great.
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay. So I think that takes care of most logistics. Maybe we can wait one more minute just to make sure everyone can join, and then we can start with the introductions. Yes, that's a good idea. No, this won't work. Stop sharing my screen. And okay. So I believe the live stream right now should be showing the slides. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And right now, do you still see this?
Working.
I'm sorry?
I don't think it's working because it has that slide showing, but just in the, what's it called? Like the way that the ad was like yesterday when I clicked the link, for example. It says waiting for SP and I keep refreshing.
Okay. You're saying the live stream isn't working?
Okay, now it's working.
Waiting for SP and I keep refreshing, for example.
Okay. So now you're seeing my browser, I believe.
Yes, we see the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, perfect. Okay. All right. So let's begin. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Welcome, bienvenue. Avant de commencer, on a quelques annonces à faire. Premièrement, malheureusement, Jane Gobia va pas pouvoir nous joindre aujourd'hui. Jane Gobia won't be joining us today. She has fallen ill and therefore she couldn't make it. That doesn't mean that we won't be able to discuss certain discussion points that are going to be relevant to our discussion today. So right now, are you still seeing my slides or are you still seeing my notes? Slides or notes?
Slides.
Okay, perfect. And so first off, we would like to wish Jane a speedy recovery, and we hope to bring to light her work and vision in the future as much as, since this is a much needed conversation to be had in academia. Despite her absence, we will still discuss challenges to postgraduate employment for historically excluded groups. If anything, this highlights the necessity for allies and other people in positions of power and privilege to engage in this discussion. We all have a role to improving our academic workspace and to ensure that it is accessible, inclusive, diverse, and equitable to all. So our second PSA right now concerns language. You might have noticed that I've said a few words in French. Live interpretation services are available for people on the Zoom call. Here are the instructions on how to enable them. We also enabled upvote feature for the Q&A sessions later. If you want to vote on the questions that are of most interest to you. This session will be recorded and posted on YouTube afterwards. And so you can come back to listen to the to re-listen to the conversation or to hear my voice at a 2 times playback speed. Before we commence, we would like to take an opportunity to make a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Science and Policy Exchange is located on unceded indigenous land. The Kaninkehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and water on which we gather today. Chiochake, commonly known as Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, including the Kaninkehaga of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe. Aujourd'hui, elle abrite de nombreux peuples autochtones et autres. Nous respectons les liens continus entre le passé, le présent et l'avenir dans nos relations avec les peuples autochtones et autres au sein de la communauté montréalaise. Visitez nativelands.ca pour apprendre davantage à propos des territoires, de la langue et des traités autochtones à travers le monde. So now just a few words about SP for those who don't know what we typically do. SP provides support and builds capacity for tomorrow's leaders in science policy. Science is, after all, not disconnected from society, and we try to bridge the gap between science, society, and policy. We also produce and disseminate resources for and from the next generation of scientists and researchers, and we engage stakeholders and rights holders in science, policy, and society to amplify and promote the inclusion of next generation voices. If you want to be involved, SP aims to bring together science policy enthusiasts and practitioners via a community platform that is our Slack workspace. You can request to join our Slack by contacting us via email. You can also follow our projects by subscribing to our newsletter or follow us on social media platforms. Alors, avec ça de côté, nous pouvons commencer la discussion d'aujourd'hui. Nous allons d'abord commencer avec de courtes introductions pour chaque panéliste avant de procéder à une discussion ouverte. Alors, pour commencer, j'invite Tina Grosso à parler de son expérience. Elle est une scientifique translationnelle chez Forbius et elle est également membre du groupe d'experts du CAC sur la transition des doctorants vers le marché du travail. Tina, pouvez-vous nous décrire brièvement votre transition vers le secteur privé et nous résumer les points saillants du rapport du CAC?
Bonjour à tous et merci Nkoy pour l'introduction. Je voudrais commencer justement par les points saillants un peu du comité d'experts du Conseil des Académies canadiennes. Donc en fait, c'est un comité pluridisciplinaire qui s'est réuni à la demande d'Innovation, Sciences et Développement économique Canada pour vraiment étudier disons comment les doctorants et les détenteurs de PhD rentraient ou ne rentraient pas de façon efficace dans le marché du travail. Et en fait, on est parti d'un constat assez frappant qui est qu'un doctorat n'est ni gage vraiment de réussite, ni gage d'emploi, et qu'il y a une réelle manque de valorisation en fait, de ce diplôme. Et un chiffre que je trouve très frappant est qu'il faut 16 ans pour un détenteur de doctorat pour rattraper le niveau de revenu potentiel qu'il aurait eu s'il s'était arrêté au niveau master. Donc 16 ans, c'est énorme quand on sait l'investissement personnel et professionnel que représente un doctorat. Et on s'est donc demandé, mais qu'est-ce qui fait qu'il y a un tel manque de valorisation? Et on s'est rendu compte qu'il y avait une tension entre la production de doctorants et leur intégration dans le marché du travail. D'une part, le Canada produit, on va dire, de plus en plus de doctorants, ce qui n'est pas non plus un chiffre astronomique, puisque comparativement aux autres pays de l'OCDE, le Canada reste en dessous en termes de nombre de doctorants par année. Et de l'autre côté, en fait, non seulement les postes permanents en université sont en baisse, mais il y a également un manque de recrutement dans le secteur privé. Il y a ce qu'on a appelé un manque de capacité d'accueil, puisqu'il y a, encore une fois, comparativement à d'autres pays, une faible dépense en recherche et développement du Canada, mais que surtout, cet investissement en recherche et développement est très centré au niveau des universités, à hauteur de 70%, je crois. Et donc, le Canada n'investit pas en fait dans son secteur privé et donc n'investit pas dans un domaine qui pourrait être une grande capacité d'accueil des étudiants, des doctorants, des diplômés. Et à cela, à cette tension, on va dire, de demande et recrutement, s'ajoute une tension au niveau des compétences des doctorants. Non seulement les doctorants ont une faible compréhension de leurs propres connaissances et comment ça peut s'appliquer sur le marché du travail, mais aussi, en parallèle de ça, il y a aussi un manque de compétences par rapport à ce qu'attendent les recruteurs dans le secteur privé, notamment en matière d'adaptabilité, de travail d'équipe, vraiment. And those observations really relate to my experience. When I was looking for options following my postdoctoral fellowship, I really found exactly what I told you, that for R&D positions, which is sort of the sector I was looking for, there are not so many opportunities in Canada because most of the research is done in the universities, and there's not many options for development really. And the second observation that I personally made that also supports the CCA report observations is about the skills. I really saw a skill gap, not only in terms of me being able to frame the skills I had into the right vocabulary, the right perspectives, but also I was able to experience during those first 2 years that I spent now in the private sector, that an example is that teamwork is brought to a very different level. Another example is also the ownership. When you're, in my case, as a postdoctoral fellow, I'm the one counting the slides. I'm also the one writing the grant, and I'm also the one, writing the paper. Well, in industry, it's very different. In industry, things are more into pieces, and then you're part of the whole puzzle. You're not sort of the decision-making process in every aspect of it. So there's a little difference in terms of integration, how you integrate into a team between those two sectors. So I think that I'll end up here for now, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tina. We'll move forward with a discussion that I think you touched on a little bit about the specific challenges for at least your own experience. One aspect that was mentioned in the CCA report is about gender barriers, specifically across gender barriers. So I believe, this is a great segue to what you would discuss, considering a recent report by CCUNESCO this week. Would you like to elaborate on what the CCA had mentioned and specifically what the CCUNESCO adds to this?
Merci. Donc, je vais commencer un petit peu en français, mais je vais continuer en anglais. Qu'est-ce qui est, c'est que comme chaire de recherche UNESCO sur les communautés durables, je travaille beaucoup sur l'aspect du genre et de la culture. Et en même temps, c'est quelque chose qui, pour moi, est très important, étant une femme en sciences. En 2019, lors d'une table ronde avec les lauréates du prix L'Oréal, dont Tina elle faisait partie aussi, on avait invité beaucoup de personnes, une question était venue justement sur les attentes des doctorants, et surtout des doctorantes, au niveau des sciences. Et on a fait une analyse à ce moment-là pour pouvoir, et l'analyse s'est faite pour ainsi dire à peu près en même temps que celui du conseil. Dans notre cas, on avait vraiment une approche au niveau plus académique. Et ce qu'on a réalisé, je dois dire que ma co-auteure, Jocelyn Baker, m'a aidé beaucoup à ce niveau-là. And what we discovered is that when you start looking at the numbers, first of all, 70% of people going to a PhD are thinking that they will be going for an academic position after. And when you look at the reality, however, only 18% are going to gradually become a full-time academic position. When we look at that, of that, there are 22% that will be in the STEM, so the sciences, technology, engineering, or mathematics. And on these 22%, only 12% are women. So when we look at how many are going to officially get a position in the STEM as professor, we're talking 0.4%. So it's very different than the men that will have on average 3.5% chance. So men will have around 8 times more possibilities to get an academic position than a woman. So this is the reality that we are facing still here in Canada right now. And so when we think about that, that means that we're still at a very low level. So the report that we didn't do just the analysis of what we have in terms of current situation, but we looked also at consideration, especially at the university level. How can we better prepare? And I agree completely with Tina. How do we completely better prepare PhD students that they know in advance what are their possibilities, what skills do they need? And this is in terms of, it can be in terms of the Faculty of Math and Science, it can be in terms of the Faculty of Grad Studies and the university. So really first exposing to more types of careers in the STEMs. What are the opportunities? Increasing the awareness and training of supervisor. I don't know how many of my colleagues over time that I heard, oh, I'm disappointed because most of my PhD students don't go to academic, because there's always this principle that you'll have to leave your legacy in the academic world. And this is an expectation sometimes that is probably not helping the situation. Also more visibility of women role models and mentors. However, we have to be very careful because often we're only so few women that we are asked a lot too many times to be able to do anything. And making sure that universities have professional skills that are transferable to the industry. I completely agree. I've been associate to a consulting firm before, and you have to know how to work with teams. You have to know the time management and the way that it works, and the deadlines are completely different. So these are the type of things that need to really brought back to universities so that they are prepared to go to the industry, consulting firms, governmental organization, NGOs, etc. So I'll leave that for now, and there are many more possibilities that we can discuss later.
Yes, we will definitely discuss a lot of this in more detail soon. I just want to mention briefly that we are experiencing some difficulties with the live stream. So yes, if you're seeing me not fully focused in the next 5 minutes or so, that's simply because what's happening. But we will hopefully get this working soon. So now moving forward to another point that we've talked a lot so far is about skills and employment. So we have Gail Boquet, who works at MyTax, and MyTax is an organization that connects students to employers. And they have conducted many studies on the skills that are required by employers. So now I'm just going to pass it along to Gail. If you can say a few words about your work at MyTax and how the skills that are needed, that are desired by employers.
Great, thank you so much. Sound check, everybody can hear me okay, I hope? Great.
Yes.
So first of all, huge thanks to SBE for including MyTax in this discussion. This is a subject that is really at the core of what we do here at MyTax. We're seized with these things all of the time, so I'm really happy to be here. And I guess the lens I'm going to bring to this discussion is the lens potential of our highly qualified personnel, so of our PhD graduates. Right now, the underutilization of that talent is an issue for Canada. Tina has outlined some of that already in her opening comments, and I think some of the challenges were really highlighted in the CCA report that was recently published. So we live in this MyTax lives in this really unique spot in the Canadian ecosystem, in that we sit right between academic institutions, the public sector, and the private sector. That's the sweet spot where we live. we can see very clearly that there is sort of misalignment in the system, right? There's, you know, the academic players have sort of their priorities and their goals and their purpose. Private sector companies also have their sort of perspectives and roles and mandates. And we've heard already about some of the differences in how those things function. It's a very different thing to work in the private sector than it is to work in academia. And then there's the public sector as well, where we're also providing a bridge into the public sector. And that again is another whole sort of culture, a way of working. And so when you boil that down into thinking about skills, and that's a really small word, but it has really big implications, it is not necessarily an easy thing to bridge those different worlds. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? All the players in that ecosystem have their own perspectives, have their own mandates, have their own priorities, have their own language, even their own vocabulary, their own sense of time. And so there is a misalignment in the system that exists, and there's sort of there's no magic answer to the question of what skills are employers looking for. I can tell you that oftentimes employers have a hard time articulating those skills, even though they're the skills that they want. And that is part of that translational issue too. I mean, I think if we look at the skills that you get from doing an advanced degree, like a PhD, there's a bucket load of really valuable skills just in doing that. But it may be very hard to translate them in an understandable way to what the private sector is looking for. And really what the private sector is looking for are certain, they want those skills because they want to drive their own objectives and they want to drive the behavior that will, you know, take their company to success, right? So even that can be difficult to articulate back into, okay, well, what does that mean for specific skills that I'm looking for? So there's no really quick and dirty answer to that. But I would say that I think this maybe is sounding kind of negative, but I don't think it needs to be. I think oftentimes we also get hung up in terminology, you know, this skill versus that skill, and then all these words for soft skills, professional skills, transferable skills, human skills, which I really don't like, but all these terms are floating out there and it's kind of confusing. But I think we kind of have to acknowledge that skills are kind of an intangible thing that are hard to measure, hard to define. Just kind of let's put the vocabulary and the terminology stuff aside and think about, well, what is it that I can contribute, right, as a potential employee to an employer? And just sort of, there's a lot of work I think we can do in articulating what the skills are. And then also there's a lot of work we can do in helping the private sector understand what skills they're looking for. But I'll leave it there for now, but there's a lot of different things that we do at MyTax to help with that transition, to help build those skills, and we really do play sort of that translational in between worlds kind of role. So I'll leave it there, but there's lots more I can get into later.
Parfait, merci Gail. Maintenant, je voudrais passer à Carl. Carl, tu nous as informé comme quoi tu as travaillé avec MyTax dans le passé. Donc, vu qu'on vient juste de discuter de MyTax, c'est une belle transition. Mais maintenant, tu travailles à l'Institut quantique comme un program manager. Est-ce que tu peux nous décrire ton travail et ton expérience à MyTax et comment ton expérience comme étant un récent titulaire d'un doctorat informe des projets et des changements que tu espères apporter à ton institut de recherche?
Avec plaisir. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui. Puis je tiens à remercier Dialogue Sciences Politiques pour organiser un événement comme ça. C'est vraiment des événements comme ça, c'est super important pour justement permettre aux étudiants et aux étudiantes de trouver l'emploi de leur rêve. Donc, dans mon cas, je me suis rendu compte assez tôt, en fait, dans mon doctorat, que je ne voulais pas suivre une carrière professorale à l'université. Puis, je voyais mon superviseur travailler des horaires assez fous, au final, même pas être dans le laboratoire. Puis, ce genre de vie-là, ça ne m'intéressait pas personnellement. Puis, il a fallu que je trouve des façons d'aller vivre des expériences en dehors du milieu académique pour justement trouver peut-être un emploi qui m'intéresserait le plus après mes études. Puis, j'ai commencé à chercher des ressources des conseils pour m'orienter dans ce choix-là. Mais à l'université, les ressources sont beaucoup limitées pour ce genre de choses-là parce que, par exemple, malgré que mon superviseur était super ouvert, puis il voulait vraiment m'aider dans cette transition-là, mais il ne connaissait pas vraiment les genres de carrières alternatives que je pouvais avoir, puis il ne savait pas vraiment comment m'aider à aller chercher l'information. Puis mes collègues autour de moi travaillaient tous dans le milieu académique, c'était difficile d'aller chercher cette info-là. Puis donc au final, on se tourne tous vers Google et l'Internet, n'est-ce pas, pour aller chercher ce genre de conseils-là. Puis on trouve souvent les trois mêmes conseils qui sont répétés. Le premier, c'est d'aller chercher de l'expérience au milieu de travail. Puis donc, MyTax, c'est un super moyen d'aller faire ça, puis je vais en parler plus en détail. Les deux autres choses qu'on peut faire, c'est, on en a touché, c'est aller chercher des activités extracurriculaires ou parascolaires pour aller développer les compétences qui ne sont peut-être pas nécessairement développées complètement à travers le doctorat, ou plutôt très spécifiquement, puis là, aller les élargir. Puis aussi, il faut vraiment stresser ce point-là, je pense, c'est entrer en contact avec des gens qui ont fait votre parcours, quelque chose de semblable, puis qui travaillent maintenant dans des domaines qui vous intéressent, en dehors de l'académique, si c'est ça qui vous intéresse comme job de carrière. Puis, donc, pour revenir à MyTax, puis le premier point qui est aller chercher de l'expérience au milieu de travail, quand j'en ai parlé à mon superviseur, il était super ouvert, puis il m'a aidé beaucoup à créer un projet qui fitait dans mon doctorat, qui allait chercher un aspect spécifique de mon projet. Mais il y avait encore de l'appréhension sur le fait que ça allait prendre 4 à 6 mois, que ça allait peut-être allonger mon doctorat. Mais ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est qu'au final, un stage en milieu industriel, c'est une expérience qui est extrêmement riche en apprentissage, puis autant du point de vue personnel que professionnel. De développement d'attitude, de gestion de projet ou de temps, de communication vulgarisée avec des membres d'autres équipes, la multidisciplinarité, l'esprit d'entreprise, d'aller travailler justement le timeline différent. On va travailler sur un certain produit. On ne peut pas divaguer pendant 2-3 ans sur un petit truc de notre projet de recherche. Donc, je crois honnêtement que ce stage de 6 mois-là a raccourci mon doctorat au final. Sans ça, mon doctorat était probablement plus long parce que j'aurais été peut-être moins focus. Puis, en même temps, ça te donne un sentiment d'avoir vécu une expérience de travail qui est tellement différente puis qui, moi, m'intéressait beaucoup plus que de continuer dans le milieu de la recherche. Donc, ça m'a motivé à terminer mon doctorat pour aller chercher un travail qui était plus, qui allait plus avec le style de vie que je voulais avoir. Puis donc, un dernier truc pour terminer, peut-être, c'est qu'à la fin de mon doctorat, un de mes collègues m'a approché pour participer à un projet. Puis le projet, c'était de trouver comment promouvoir l'entrepreneuriat au sein de l'Institut quantique, qui était l'institut de recherche dans lequel je travaillais. Puis donc, au sein de ce projet-là, qui a duré 4 mois pendant un cours à l'université, on s'est rendu compte qu'en fait, les étudiants et les étudiantes, puis on le savait déjà parce qu'on le vivait, bien, on n'est pas au courant, ou on n'est pas au courant des emplois qu'on peut occuper à l'extérieur du milieu académique. Puis la raison principale de ça, c'est, comme j'ai mentionné tantôt, c'est qu'on ne voit pas de gens de l'extérieur du milieu académique. Donc, en premier lieu, le travail qu'il y avait à faire, c'était tout simplement de faire connaître les emplois, les gens, le milieu externe au milieu académique. Donc, c'est un peu comme ça que mon poste est né à l'Institut. Puis, suite à ce projet-là, j'ai appliqué à ce poste-là, puis je l'ai eu. Puis, une partie de mon rôle, c'est de contribuer justement à montrer à notre communauté étudiante qu'ils sont qualifiés pour aller travailler dans d'autres domaines que le milieu académique, que c'est certainement possible de faire de la recherche en dehors du monde universitaire. Puis parfois, quand on regarde nos professeurs, puis on peut se rendre compte qu'il y a probablement des gens qui ne sont pas profs, qui font beaucoup plus de recherche qu'eux au final, si c'est vraiment ça qu'on veut faire. Puis que surtout, ne pas finir professeur, c'est certainement pas un échec. Donc, ce qui est peut-être quelque chose qui est culturellement difficile à changer dans le milieu académique. Donc, je résumerai tout ça en disant que je travaille à réaliser ce changement de culture-là dans le milieu académique, puis que cet événement-là est extrêmement pertinent dans mon travail. Donc, je suis vraiment content d'être là et participer à la discussion.
Merci, Carl. Je suis content d'entendre que tu essaies d'apporter ces changements-là à ton institut de recherche. Maintenant, je vais arrêter de partager mon écran et on va juste discuter en groupe. Alors, oui, je crois qu'une bonne place pour commencer, c'est en parlant des skills. On a touché à ça avant. So one question that a lot of people have, and I think we've touched on it already, is what skills are valuable by employees? You started talking about this before, Gail. Can you elaborate on your work at MyTax? And then possibly Cal and Tina, you can jump in on what your experience is, specifically relating to skills.
Sure. Yeah. So I know the report, the CCA report, highlighted a skills gap between, you know, what's provided in terms of the PhD sort of process and what the needs of industry or not-for-profits are, or even the public sector. In some cases, there is a real skills gap, and in some cases, it's a perceived skills gap too. And I'd like to emphasize that a little bit. And I think it goes back to some of the challenges around industry having a difficult time articulating, you know, maybe not what they need right now, but certainly what they're going to need in the future. That's a very hard thing to sort of predict and to articulate. But like I said, there's a ton of skills, obviously, that you gain as part of your PhD experience, right? I mean, even the ability to formulate a solid research question, believe me, is a skill. And I think people who've done a PhD are like, that's no problem. That's what we do. But actually in the private sector, it's a huge thing if you can find somebody with that skill alone, right? Let alone all of the project management and the problem solving and the initiative and the drive and the resilience and all those things that come with doing a PhD. And those are actually very highly sought after in the private sector. What we do at MyTax, which Carl so brilliantly just described a couple of minutes ago, is we create opportunities for collaboration between the private sector or the not-for-profit sector and academia. And all of the projects that we create obviously are centered mostly around research, but they all involve trainees conducting that work with their host partner. So we're actually, as Carl described, we're providing those opportunities to get trainees out of that academic environment for a 4-month or 6-month placement with a company or a not-for-profit organization, or even with the public sector. And those research skills are being applied in a very different environment. And there's a lot of learning that comes with that. And a lot of those experiences that you gain in that kind of environment are just going to help you kind of hit the ground running when you're looking for post-PhD employment, because you know then what it's like to be in an organization. You know what it's like to work in that kind of a hierarchy. You know what kind of timelines industry is looking for. You know what sort of the teamwork requirements are going to be, like both Tina and Carl, I think, highlighted. So, and then on top of what MyTax does in terms of those experiential learning pieces, there's also a whole series of skill development or professional skills development training workshops that we provide. And some of those are pretty sort of traditional things, you know, how to give an effective presentation, time management, project management. But even there, we're seeing an evolution, and I would say some of the skills that we're seeing are being sort of more and more requested or more sought after, have to do with things like entrepreneurialism, like having an entrepreneurial mindset. And even if you're not going to start your own company, like that sort of entrepreneurial approach to things. So you can be an intrapreneur even. But we definitely see a lot of interest in that, a lot of interest around digital skills and what that means. So there's a whole suite of sort of additional skills that we offer to students, and you don't even have to be like a MyTax award recipient. Any PhD pretty much on any campus can access those training workshops as well. So big emphasis on professional skills development, and all of those things are designed to help with that transition process post degree.
Thanks, Gail. Would you like to elaborate, Tina or Carl?
Yes, definitely. So I completely agree with everything that Gail said. It is really hard for the company sometimes to articulate, and I've seen it with my own eyes, because, you know, I used to be in the pool of PhD graduates. I mean, I was getting out of my postdoc, but like pool of PhD graduates trying to get into the private sector. And then I had the feeling that the private sector was not hiring. And then I've been scientist for a year in my company, and then suddenly the company needed to hire. And I was like, it's going to be easy, right? There's so many talents that are just waiting for a job, but the recruiter just could not find a good fit. So to me, and this is where it it had to rely on the skills, is that there's so many people looking for jobs that are talented, that's, believe they're a good fit. And at the same time, employers have a hard time filling the gap they need, which is still for me a big disconnect. Even though we're tackling here the reasons why this disconnect happened. And I like the term you use, Gail, the perceived, that is a perceived gap. I think that a lot has to deal with the vocabulary. For example, I know that, validating an assay for me that I'm in drug development meant something in academia. It totally means something else, validating an assay into, drug development process, right? So even just one word means something completely different, all the processes that are behind it. And not only when you move from academia to private sector, you really change sector. So you change mindset, you change hierarchy, you change everything. But also you have to keep in mind that from a company to another company, they have very different corporate cultures. Very, very different. So it's like a microsector itself type of. You could feel that you're at least in my opinion, I did not necessarily look for a job title. At the beginning, it is what I was doing, but then I realized that each company give a very different job title and a very different task list attached to this title. Like a scientist in my company means a totally different thing than a scientist at Novartis, and it means a totally different thing than a scientist at Caprion, which is a CRO. So what's behind the job title is very different, but also the corporate culture, the hierarchy, the flexibility that you have is very, very different. So do not, at least an advice I would give to students is, do not necessarily look for a good job title or a good position. Look for a company that has a culture that has similar values than you. And I know it sounds very fluffy. It sounds that it's not very tangible in terms of looking to it, but you'll get a feeling by meeting them. You'll get a feeling by hearing about the employees. When you have those, informational interviews with the employees that are at that company, you'll hear the type of vocabulary they use and what it means. So I think there is certainly, to me, a perceived and maybe also a not so perceived skill gap or misalignment. But I think we should also understand that when you approach your job search, moving from academia to the private sector, you need to approach it in a certain way. You should not look for job titles. You should look for the corporate culture that suits you best.
Well, that seems to be very similar to recommendations that undergraduates typically receive before proceeding to graduate schools, like learn about their supervisor, their research labs, and so on. So this definitely is a transferable notion across professional barriers. But as much as I think this would be a great transition to talking about the academic culture itself, I think it's worthwhile to pause and maybe think about how students should navigate this space. So we've said a lot about how employers have to connect and students are lacking this awareness. But if, as a student, what should I do to try and seek out these opportunities, and what type of programs and resources are mostly helpful? Maybe this is something that Carl or Tina can answer for a reason.
Yes, maybe I can touch a bit on this. So, as was said by Gail and Tina right now, employers, sometimes don't really know what they're looking for, but we did a survey regarding quantum technology companies here, and we asked them basically, two main questions. The first one was, what are the skills that you want in your company, and what are the skills that are missing from your employees when you hire them? And, it varies from company to company, but there are three big ones that are always there. And first one is, so maybe I'll switch to French because it's easier to me. So la première, c'est la gestion de projet. La deuxième, c'est le travail d'équipe. Puis le troisième, c'est multidisciplinarité. Puis ces trois compétences-là, on est capable, puis on les développe par défaut, d'une certaine façon, quand on fait un doctorat ou une maîtrise jusqu'à différents niveaux, parce qu'on a notre propre projet, il faut qu'on le gère. Puis on est nécessairement un petit peu multidisciplinaire parce qu'on discute avec nos collègues, on a des collaborations, mais on n'a pas nécessairement de travail d'équipe en tant que tel. Puis Tina, il a touché à ça en voulant dire que le travail d'équipe de milieu académique et le travail d'équipe dans le milieu industriel, c'est vraiment pas la même chose. C'est important pour les étudiants de se rendre compte de où ils ont un manque d'une certaine façon. Puis pour faire ça, il faut savoir qu'est-ce que les gens veulent à l'extérieur. Donc, ce que je dirais à un étudiant qui cherche à faire une transition, c'est premièrement de faire l'évaluation de tes propres compétences puis de ce que tu as vécu toi-même comme personne pendant tes études jusqu'à date. Puis il y a plusieurs méthodes pour faire ça. Il y a des ressources sur Internet, par exemple, Science ont un Personal Development Plan que les personnes peuvent aller suivre gratuitement. Puis après ça, aller justement faire les démarches que Tina proposait, d'aller voir les compagnies qui pourraient vous intéresser, voir le type d'emploi qui vous intéresse, puis voir qu'est-ce que les personnes vivent quand ils font ce travail-là au jour le jour. Puis appeler ces personnes-là, envoyer-leur des courriels, ils vont être super contents de vous parler. C'est fou à quel point on est capable d'aller chercher des gens puis de leur parler pendant 30 minutes. Les gens aiment ça parler de ce qu'ils font. Les gens sont super ouverts pour parler à des personnes qui pourraient peut-être travailler dans leur compagnie. Donc, n'hésitez pas. Puis faites ces deux étapes-là, puis ça va vraiment beaucoup aider à trouver un emploi pour plus tard, selon moi.
Est-ce qu'il y aurait un changement de culture dans les murs de l'université qui pourrait aider les étudiants à faire la transition? Peut-être au niveau de la supervision, peut-être? Tina, je vois que tu as ta main levée.
Yes, I wanted maybe to just touch base on what Carl was saying before we jump into the mentor side, maybe on the mentee side. What students can do, I don't think I should mention MyTax anymore because we're like a live advertisement, I think, for MyTax here in terms of bridging the gap. But something that I want to highlight is what helped me a lot is community engagement. And I'm not going to mention Science and Policy Exchange, but I've been with Science and Policy Exchange for 5 years. And this is what made my CV stand out. It's not like my job is a scientist in a drug development company. Policy is not on their radar, but it's not about the science policy that I did, is the being able to get outside of academia, going to a different sector, which is a nonprofit, being able to do a totally different teamwork in a mini team, because I'm in a biotech company, right? So it's a small team. We get to do, we have timelines that are different. We have last minute changes. We have to adapt to urgency. All of that, they were very sensitive to this. So I would add to what Carl was saying in terms of, go, if you feel like you're missing some skills, go get them. And the nonprofit sector and the community engagement is really, really a good way.
I can definitely attest to the engaging with Science and Policy Exchange, where I've learned definitely a lot about team management and skills and working in presenting, although that message is somewhat undercut with the rocky start of this live stream. But now I think we can maybe transition to the other aspect that I was mentioning beforehand about mentorship. So yes, students and employers have to help bridge that skills gap of Notion, but the academic environment itself plays a large role, specifically PIs. PIs play a role, as the CCA report highlighted, PIs play a important role in a student's postgraduate career outcomes. This includes facilitating professional development program opportunities and mentorship. Leah, maybe you can speak more on certain mentorship, how PIs can be better actors in this conversation.
Yeah, I think this is a very important part. I should say that, but in my case as a PI, I should say that most of my students are working in teams, so they learn very quickly how to work with teams. It's true, I do a lot of applied research with industry, so that helps a lot also for them to connect with, in my case, farmers, for example, grape growers, etc. So at that point, they are learning quite a lot on that level. And I think one thing that is important is really for PI to to go and reach other resources. They don't need to be the one talking all the time to their students. And that's one thing. The other component that they realize is many PI are trying to make sure that, especially for PhD, they focus only on what they do and forget the rest. And, you had, Tina, Carl, you had some initiative to go and search, but a lot of PhD are kind of discouraged by their supervisor to do that. And that's where I think the problem comes, that they are not prepared, and that they should seek as soon as they get to university, and they should get a mentor. And the mentor is not necessarily the supervisor. That's something that they have to realize. They have to find a person who really can help getting the skills, the other skills that are important. I always tell my students, and in fact, Jocelyn, who wrote with me this report, went and got many of these workshops, different skills and everything, and that helped her a lot. And I'm pushing my students to do lay language blogs, because we work with the local newspaper to learn about how to prepare, their project management, especially when we do field work, for example. All these kind of things, and how to work with the team at that point, because you're not going in the field alone. So how to deal with these kind of things. And I should say one thing, that a colleague of me at one point, and we were both relatively new in our position as academics, she said, one thing that we don't teach when we're a PhD student, and that I think is still the case right now, is time management and human management skills. And that it's not only needed in the industry, it's needed when you become a PI, because you become, in my case, sometimes you become a mom, you become a psychologist, you become a counselor, you become a mentor, you become pretty much everything in your life when you start, supervising a team. And I should say I've worked quite closely with different industry, and I know that it's very similar in some aspects. But we have to give the chance to the graduate students to have the possibility to acquire these different skills. I know at Brock we have now a little bit more workshop, but again, we have to have the supervisor encouraging the students. It's better probably to have an extra term in terms of duration of a PhD or a master or anything, and have these new skills, than trying to finish too fast and you don't have enough experience by the end.
Thank you. Yes, I do want to just note about the length of the PhD. Something interesting that was included in the CCA report, which highlighted that the PhD is actually shortening over time, over the past few years. So it seems like this is a change that you would be recommending, to actually lengthen it, to make it, to include more time for PhD students to learn of more skills and opportunities outside of the academy.
Yeah, and I would say one thing is that, unfortunately, we're still in this crack, I would put it that way, of that it's publishing as soon as possible. So do a very quick experiment, change for the next chapter, doing a quick experiment, publish, change to the next chapter, so that you can finish quick. However, what I'm saying now is that many of them may have a lot of papers, and I should say I've been on hiring committees this day, a lot. And I can tell you, even at the academic level, what we're now discussing is not just a number of papers. It's really, what are your social impact? What are the other skills that you have that you will bring to the university? And that's also very important. If you cannot manage that, you will never be able to collaborate, because now research is collaborative. Thinking that you have your own lab and you will not see anybody else, that's pretty much gone now. So have to change this mentality as well.
I want to follow that thread just a little bit after, but I just want to go through some recommendations included in the CC report concerning mentorship. So one recommendation that the CC report mentioned is to include non-academic advisors in PhD committees and to better use alumni networks. Quick thoughts on this, Tina?
Yes, thanks, Ankoy. I wanted to raise that, of course, mentorship for women, and it's because my experience is also, let's say, much needed compared to academia. So maybe I can frame it this way. What was very useful for me in moving into the private sector is to be able to see representation, to be able to see successful women that made the right choice from themselves and that were happy, and that could help me move into that sector. Mentor, again, doesn't mean PI, doesn't mean academic sector, doesn't mean that you want to become that person. It just means that somebody that has a network, somebody that has an address book, somebody that even just moved to that corporate culture over academia. And the two groups that I can cite that I've benefited from is the Women in Bio, which is networking for women in the biotechnology sector. They've been amazing, and I can count 2 or even 3 mentors there that, I have a call like tonight with one of them, like just for a quick discussion about corporate culture, understanding what this means, etc. And the other group that I want to mention is WIMD. It's women in male-dominated industries. That's also a group of women that sort of try to help themselves. And those are just 2 examples because they mean something to me, but you just need to find sort of your own. And just like Liette was saying, we should not put too much pressure on the PI, because the PI already has to write the grants, is already an HR, is already a mom, a psychologist, exactly as you said. And as you described, Carl, you cannot ask a PI to know all the different careers possibility and the streams of I don't know all the streams of careers in my own company. I don't know in my own sector. So how can you ask your PI to be all of that? So I think you need to really broaden sort of your network, and getting outside of academia is also that is broaden your network. And exactly as you said, Ankoy, I think that one way to bridge it would be to have the corporate culture come in academia, like bridge, like have some level of mentorship, leverage the alumni network. And for example, this is something we do at Science and Policy Exchange. It's to bringing the alumni what they've become. And I don't know about the other panelists, but if somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, hey, we come from the same this and that, or hey, we work together at SPE, I want an advice on this and that, I'm more than happy to just share my experience. But I agree that having sort of a mandatory, let's say, bridge to bring this influence back in academia, and not only having it into the extracurricular sort of sphere, would be definitely a good move.
Yale, I just wanted to have your thoughts on this, whether MyTax is considering something on mentorship, on professional mentorship, that is.
So I guess first I would underscore what a couple of things that Tina just said, and that is the power, first of all, the power of your network. And speaking as somebody with, enough gray hair to be speaking from a perspective of somebody who's been in industry for a long time, when you get an email or connect on LinkedIn from somebody who says, hey, I'm interested in a career along the lines of what you do, or hey, I have a similar background to you, or I went to the same institution, are like, people love talking about themselves, right? So when we see that kind of interest from somebody, chances are pretty good you're going to get a response, and you're going to get some pretty willing participants to give you advice, or maybe not advice, but maybe even just some lessons learned along the way. So I would really encourage everybody to do exactly what Tina just said. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. I think you will find many more willing participants than maybe you think. So building that network, getting out there, getting involved in other activities. I mean, SPE is a fantastic organization and a fantastic example. And I've been fortunate enough to know people at SPE for a few years now in different iterations. And I'm just constantly blown away by what the organization does and the people that come through it. But there's lots of organizations like that, either within your academic institution or beyond your academic institution. And highlight those things on your CV, because they will make your CV stand out. In terms of, you know, and I think this was raised in the CCA report too, and that was around the academic culture, right? And you know, many profs who are in academic institutions were taught to be profs and came through the system with one career goal, and that's to be a prof and a researcher in an academic institution. So they may not necessarily know how to train somebody to work outside of academia, and or they may have that attitude of, well, if you don't become a researcher and a tenured professor at an academic institution, then, you know, what's the point? Then you failed, you know, and there's that mindset, I think, has to change, but I think it is also changing. And I think, again, not to talk about my tax too much, but coming from that my tax point of view, I mean, even if you just look at the numbers of internships that we support and have supported over the year, like 4 years ago, we were delivering about 3,500 internships per year. This year, we're on track to deliver almost 17,000 internships across Canada. Like, that's a huge growth in numbers. And that to me, like when Carl said, you know, I went to my prof and he was really excited, enthusiastic. I was like, great, like that's what we need more of. And I think it's slowly happening. I think it's slowly building. In terms of like formal mentorship, I don't know that we have sort of a formalized program for mentorship, but definitely we are all about making connections and plugging into networks. And that's critically important.
Yes, and elaborating on mentorship, I think both the CCA report and CCUNESCO reports have discussed gender disparities across career outcomes. And so this probably has an effect. Well, mentorship has an effect on this as well. When we're trying to push for mentorship, what should we be mindful of, and especially regarding EDI, where, as Tina discussed, it's typically helpful to have mentors that you can identify with. And in certain industries, women are very much less well represented than men. And this is, I've so far talked about gender, but this also cuts across racial lines as well. Notably, I want to point out that recently there has been the Canadian Black Scientists Network was created over summer, which connects scientists with Black mentors. So in terms of mentorship, what should we be mindful of? And maybe this question could be addressed to you, Liette.
Yes, I think, well, first of all, I should say one of my best mentors were men. So I think it's really depending on who has the sensitivity to be able to bring you to your advantage, you know, and make sure that you can explore correctly what are your choices and where you're going. I think that's, for me, it was something very important. We still need more role models. And one of the consideration we talked in our case, in our report, is really to increase better representations. That's the first thing, but also gradually better tracking of where the PhDs are going when they leave the university, not only by gender, but also culture, races, and all that, so that gradually we can reconnect these people, you know, and they can help because they become a role model in some way. And that, I think it's something that is quite important. I would say also the other component is we have to be careful to not abuse. Like, I should say, my first position, I was in the university that I was the second woman in their history to be employed in the full faculty. So it's very easy at that point. And I remember the other faculty woman told me directly, finally, somebody else to share the job, because at one point you become solicited a lot and you cannot take, you cannot take everybody at one point. So that's something to be careful. I should say I've been mentor of international men right now, coming from other countries who are of different colors, and they appreciate it. What they appreciate is that you have to be able as a mentor to give the time, to be able to get the call in the afternoon or at night, or be able to give them the good points and bringing some encouragement as well. And I think this is where, it becomes important, not only to have a person the same color, the same gender, etc., but also to have a person that really can get you to push ahead.
Yes, that's a good point. I want to follow up on another discussion point that was included in the CC report. So the CC report recommends many changes to the academic culture to help PhDs transition to other career paths. Notably, it identified increasing interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research opportunities, ethical and societal impact considerations, and a better understanding to grapple with differences of opinions and experiences as something that's instrumental to improving the academic culture to broaden people's perception of career paths. Would one of you be interested in speaking more on this notion of interdisciplinarity and societal impact?
Maybe I can try to go first. So as we see right now, a lot of PhD research projects are becoming more and more multidisciplinary just because of the nature of the advancement of science right now. So fundamental research has come to a point where simply diving really deep in a single field is either extremely hard, or is more and more disconnected from societal problems. And so a lot of projects and a lot of people are moving to projects that are either in collaboration with multiple disciplines, and that's something that is lacking right now from a lot of undergraduate programs. So when people try to tackle these issues, it's really hard for students to get in them. But I would say that it's something that's necessary if you want to push the boundaries of science further in multiple disciplines, and a lot of universities are moving towards these kinds of projects.
I can probably add that it's changing in many universities. I know at Brock we have many now multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary programs, and it starts now from the undergrad to the graduate core programs. And I agree with Carl, it's needed. We need to, and I know that even in my lab, because in fact, my UNESCO chair is in the Faculty of Social Sciences and the Faculty of Math and Science. So I'm working in both cases with communities and industry. So you start at one point to, I would say, transfer these skills and transfer these issues and material to the students as well. So I have a big lab, and as I said, most of them are doing lay language blogs. They are learning how to interact with employees in the industry, how to be able to present not only in scientific conferences, but also in communities, in public places, so that they are getting not only the pure science part, but also how do you translate this material so that it can be used in society. And I think that we have to remember that we're moving now to open science. We have the recommendation of 2017 on the definition of science and scientists from the UNESCO, that is very clear that we have to, all research should be open to community, should be open to people. So that means you have to learn these skills. It has to be part now of a curriculum. And I think universities will have to change gradually at this level, will have to change their mentality for that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a conversation that even in my field of physics, we are having as well. Peut-être pour finir, on peut peut-être discuter de qu'est-ce que les étudiants peuvent faire pour changer le milieu académique. Est-ce que quelqu'un aurait des recommandations concrètes à donner à nos participants? Tina?
Yeah, join Science and Policy Exchange. That's number one. I would say anything that would amplify your voice. Anything that is student association. Now at university, there's a lot of committees that have 1 or 2 student representatives. I'm a big advocate for community engagement, whatever that means sort of to you. So amplify your voice if that's within university itself, within your department, within the student association, or within non-for-profit like Science and Policy Exchange and others. Amplify your voice and don't be too shy. What I mean by that is that sometimes one has that big imposter syndrome, that why would I be the one speaking for? Am I really representative of the full community? You know, that sounds like a lot. You're not sure you can handle this, you know, sort of big hat as I'm the student representative. I'm representing the students at McGill, right? It might sound too heavy, but if you're not the one stepping up and doing that, will that mean that there will be no student representation? So I think whatever is your own way to amplify your voice.
To this, yes. So if you don't know where to start, I would tell you, you know, you see your PIs, you see how their time schedules are crazy. Just ask them if you can help them with something. You know, I started and I organized group meetings in my lab, and then I went up and I began organizing all the seminars in a certain field, and then organize conferences, and you go up this way. Because there are many things that you can do in whatever community you're in that will make everyone's life better. So find those and then do them. Yes.
That's a great recommendation. I would definitely second that.
I would say that pretty much the same. We have started this, and in fact, it's one of our postdocs that started it's called the GRAMS for the graduate and research assistant seminar or discussion system, and it's happening every couple of weeks. And to be able just to get this discussion, bring dialogue at different level, not just academic, but also like, as I said last week, February 11, we discussed about gender issues and science, for example. So we're doing a lot of these things so that students kind of have the possibility to go further in terms of their vision, if you want, of their views of the world. The same that I don't know how many students have encouraged graduate students to become member of the Commission on Ecosystem Management at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, where I work, and many of them have been able to now get position. I have one that is policy analyst in another province. I have another one that is, doing about policy analyst with. I do a lot of policy analysis these days with the federal government, but they all were able to first connect with other people, and this way realize that there's another world than just the academic. And I think this, they need professional, they need practitioner, they need government people, they need and NGOs, a lot of NGOs. So they at that point see but what is on there, what is the panoply of possibilities for them at the end.
Yeah, that's great. Gail?
Can I just make really one super quick addition, and that is just to say that there's lots of organizations out there nowadays that are all about promoting science. And these organizations in and of themselves are a great opportunity for students or trainees to get involved in. There's programs that are like, reach back into, high school or primary schools and bring science to kids. There's, soapbox science events, there's science slams, science, trivia nights, science book clubs. Like there's all kinds of organizations out there that are sponsoring these very science-focused type of events and programs. So there's tons of opportunities to get involved in things like that. And you can start small, and as you get more comfortable, you build. And maybe if you're not so comfortable, speaking out on behalf of a whole group or students or whatever, start small and get comfortable and build and try new experiences and get comfortable communicating. That's another big skill that you'll get out of being involved in those kinds of organizations. I think to Liette's point, the ability to communicate your science is a huge skill. And there's lots of ways to dabble your toe in those waters.
Yes, thank you, Gail. Yes, all of your comments have definitely been true in my experience, and feels like I'm in a very public group therapy session right now, hearing all of your thoughts. So now I'd like to end with a quick role-playing game. I will be embodying an organization or an individual, and I would like you to tell me what I should do first thing tomorrow morning to help facilitate the transition of PhDs to non-academic career paths. I'm looking for quick and simple, concrete actions that I can take tomorrow. So as a research supervisor, what should I do first thing tomorrow morning, Liette?
First, change the famous course in many universities on seminars that is only focusing on academic seminars with academic, for example, preparing of, NSERC grants, when in fact there are many other things in life. So getting a lot more diversity in these kind of setting. That would be very useful, I think, for all graduate students.
Merci. Carl, je crois que tu voulais aussi répondre à cette question. Si tu étais un superviseur, c'est quoi ta recommandation pour eux?
Oui, ça serait de s'asseoir avec chacun de vos étudiantes la prochaine fois que vous avez votre meeting avec eux, puis de leur demander qu'est-ce qu'ils veulent faire dans la vie après leurs études. Parce que de ce que je sais, il y en a beaucoup qui ne posent pas nécessairement cette question-là aux étudiants parce qu'ils ont peur de ne pas être capables de les accompagner dans ce processus-là. Mais déjà, à faire le processus, c'est assez. Ça va leur permettre de se développer et de trouver les moyens pour se développer, même si vous n'êtes pas nécessairement la meilleure personne ou vous ne vous sentez pas à l'aise de le faire. N'ayez pas peur de poser leur des questions.
Je dois dire, c'est la première question que je demande normalement dans ma première entrevue.
C'est bon à savoir ça. If I am a faculty, si j'étais la faculté des études supérieures, c'est quoi la première chose que je devrais faire pour aider les étudiants au doctorat? Liette, je crois que tu voulais répondre.
Oui, probablement, mais être sûr qu'il y a beaucoup de disponibilité au niveau d'ateliers et des ateliers au niveau compétences, mais aussi des ateliers au niveau internationalisation. MyTax, en fait, parce que j'ai reçu un étudiant international de MyTax, donc je connais très bien MyTax aussi. Je pense que tout le monde a eu des liens avec. Et disons que ça aide beaucoup de pouvoir avoir cette possibilité-là de connexion avec les études graduées au niveau de toutes les compétences, les ateliers. Il faut que ça soit disponible aussi, pas seulement à certains temps où que les étudiants sont pris avec un cours, par exemple. Il faut que ça soit mis à différents temps.
Merci, Liette. Now moving on to another individual. As a graduate student seeking resources for non-academic career paths, what should I do first thing tomorrow morning? And I believe, Carl, you wanted to answer this question.
Yes. So I would say, first off, find more events like these. And then once you have an idea of what you want to do, contact people that have these jobs and talk with them. Just get out of your lab, talk with people. That's all the advice there is.
Thanks. Tina, did you have?
Yeah. Make a nice LinkedIn profile, search for people out there, search for friends of friends, connection of connections. Don't stick only to LinkedIn. Look at who's friends of a friend on Facebook as well. Start by getting your connection through friends, because that always feels more comfortable. But don't be afraid to just cold message people. My strategy to feel more comfortable at the beginning was to start with more junior position, because I felt closely related to them. So it wasn't that it wasn't that demanding for me to start discussing with them. So yeah, just as it's kind of what Carl was saying, but maybe just the online version of it.
Thank you. Now moving on to another individual, or this case group. As a governmental higher education or research policy analyst, what should I do first thing tomorrow morning to help facilitate the transitions of PhDs to non-academic career paths? And Gail, I believe you had an answer to this one.
I do, but I feel like Tina should go first, because I think mine kind of follows hers.
I don't know. That's a lot of pressure for me, Gail. To me, you need to align the funding to the impact you want to have. If your goal is to generate students that will just renew the PI pool that's in academia, then yes, your funding criteria should be the paper, should be what makes a good prof, right? But my perspective is that academia is to train the next generation of HQP, highly qualified personnel in all sectors of society. So it's all about the impact you want to have and the metrics you attribute to those impacts. To me, the funding should be linked to those types of metrics, like, and exactly as Liette was saying, like, what do your students become? You know, how also at the university level, you know, how did you facilitate their integration into the labor market?
So the reason I said mine would follow Tina's is because my recommendation would be basically one word, but I would say it 3 times, and that's data, data, data. Yeah. I think the CCA report also did a good job of pointing out sort of the difficulties or the lack of data, basically, that we have. And so, you know, if you're in a position inside government with responsibilities for this type of policy and making recommendations on exactly what Tina just said, like where the funding is going to flow and how it's going to flow, you need to be able to do that on the basis of solid evidence. And we have a kind of a gap in our data in Canada. So my absolute top recommendation would be, let's get our head around the data that we need. Let's define some metrics and let's start measuring them and tracking them from year to year. So data, data, data.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes. Yet, do you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I completely agree with Gail on this one, because it's now a few reports that we have been doing analysis at different levels. Each time, the biggest barriers that we have had, data. It's data is missing, and we can disaggregate to a certain level, but in terms of other component, it doesn't work. The other thing we have to remember, connecting to Tina, is that the Tri-Council and CFI have signed the San Francisco Declaration, which requires that we are not talking only about paper and impact factors, but that the social impacts is as important. I know we still have a lot of old guards and selection committees that are still thinking that way, but it's changing. And I think the new generation will realize a lot more. In UK, for example, when you ask for promotion, you don't need necessarily to have only your number of papers and impact factors. In fact, they're asking you to start putting what are your social impact of your research. And that brings a completely different view of what have you done, you know?
Yes, and I believe in Canada as well, we PIs are now required to write an EDI statement in their grant application. So yes, I feel like there is a general movement towards that direction. For the last stakeholder we had in mind, as a business unaware of the potential postgraduate students as employees, what should I do first thing tomorrow morning? And I believe, Gail, you would be the perfect person to ask this.
So, of course, the cheeky answer to that is call my tax, right? Because that is what we do. And I mean, in all seriousness, that is what we do. We sit down with companies, we help them understand what their challenges are, what their issues are, where they want to go. We help them define research projects, and then we connect them to experts back in academia. And for anybody out in the private sector, academia is kind of a scary thing, right? It's very hard to navigate from outside the system, particularly if you're not familiar with it. You know, and even if you went to university 20 years ago, that doesn't mean you know how to navigate a university, right? They're big, complex machines in and of themselves, and very intimidating from outside. So, I mean, yeah, the cheeky answer is call my tax, and we can help you navigate that. But underneath that is basically be open-minded, right? There's you know, one of the issues again that was in the CCA report was about the receptor capacity for HQP, right? And for sure that is a challenge that may be kind of unique to Canada. Actually, we don't necessarily see that in other jurisdictions in other countries, and Tina would know that. But it's you know, open your mind, be receptive, and then reach out, right? And start to learn about your local institutions, start to learn about the scientists in your community, start to learn about, you know, the academic institutions and what they have to offer. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. But I think again, we are seeing an increase in receptor capacity. Again, just if you look at the MyTax numbers from where we were 4 years ago to where we are now, like we're working with thousands and thousands of companies now, and many of the companies that we work with are first-time users of MyTax, so it's their first experience reaching out and partnering with academic institutions. So I think you know, slowly or surely we're affecting change. But my advice to anybody in the private sector would be open your mind to what a PhD can bring to your organization.
Thank you, Gail. Yes, so I guess now originally we wanted more time for Q&A, but I believe now we still have a few. So I have Alize, one of our volunteers, has sent me a question from the chat, I believe. I was engaged in a lot of associations, internships, and policy business outside of STEM, but I feel that employees are skeptical, always like, you have a PhD, why you want to do this? I think there is a lot of work to be done in relation to recruiters and industry NGOs. I feel like there's a lot of resistance. So I'm guessing the follow-up question to this is, how can we alleviate those resistance to receiving people from academia, which basically follows up on what you were saying before, Gail.
Quickly, I think some of the things that we've already touched on are part of the answer to that. I mean, when we talked about getting involved in organizations like SPE or Science Slams or other sort of organizations around, you know, communicating science, I think those are really important initiatives because they're helping to break down the barrier, right? And it goes back to that perception of the ivory tower. Oh, those eggheads, what do they know? They're just in there doing their own thing. But we have to actively, I think, break down those barriers. And I think storytelling is a big part of that, and having scientists, particularly, you know, trainees while they're still going through their programs, kind of breaking down some of those barriers and getting out there in the community and talking about what they do. And then the other side is what I was just talking about, which is the receptor capacity in industry and helping companies understand, or companies, not-for-profits, other organizations, understand the value that HQP can bring to their organization.
Thanks. Another question we received, and I'm just going to generalize it a little bit more. It was related to the discussions we have so far, which has focused on PhDs, but notably postdocs have challenges as well, and master's students. How much of the conversation we've had so far are applicable to them?
If I can speak for the postdocs, because I've been a postdoc myself and I did the transition to the private sector as a postdoc. My personal experience is that I'm not very different from a PhD to the eyes of a private sector. I am a person that did a lot of academia training to a certain point, period. For good or for bad. I mean, it's not a judgment. What I'm saying is I hear a lot of questions like, is it worth to do a postdoc to move to the industry? I don't know if it's worth or not. If it's worth or not, it pertains to you if you want to do it and the reasons why you want to do it. But at least for the positions I am in, like a scientist, scientists are PhD level. If you're PhD level or PhD plus postdoc, it doesn't change much. It changes your experience and your perspective, and that can be something very, very nice. For example, I would have never transitioned to the private sector after PhD. I really value my postdoc in my, let's say, career development, in my personal development. So I think that a lot of what we're saying here really are really applicable to the postdoctoral fellows, with maybe the exception that postdoctoral fellows are usually, I mean, if you look at the components of the postdoctoral fellowship pool, they have different challenges in terms of, you know, the age spectrum, in terms of when you're international, you know, you're not on a student visa, you're on a worker visa with all the implications. So most of what we're saying in terms of advices, etc., completely applies to postdoc. Postdoc, it's true, have additional challenges though.
Liet, I'll go with you first.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's really depending on what type of PhD you did, how much you have been, probably too much that, and you need to broaden, or and this is the trap that I've seen in many CVs, is that a person does a PhD, it's very narrow and stays narrow for the postdoc, sometimes even in the same lab, and stays narrow for 10 years. And at that point, what happened is there's a perception that the person is becoming overqualified at that point. So that's a trap that you have to be careful. And at that point, you may probably not be able, unless you start to broaden a bit by having different other things that you're doing, it may be a danger. And I think I've seen that too many times. I had one of these kind of postdoc at one point who you know, did postdoc after postdoc after postdoc. And at one point you become almost non-employable, especially if you want to do certain type of position. So we have to be very careful about the trap of postdoc at the same time.
I'm going to pass it to Carl, I believe, before.
So to me, this is linked to the question of before. So while employers don't understand what value PhDs can bring to their enterprise sometimes, you need to know what skills you can bring to them. And depending on if you did a master's, a PhD, or a postdoc, those are different. So at the postdoc level, maybe you do a little bit more of, you know, HR management. You were managing the lab instead of managing your own project, and you have, you know, developed these different skills that are as applicable in industry as others, but you just need to be aware of what you can do and tell them clearly, and to know what they need so that it matches. But yeah, it fits.
Thank you, Carl. Unless you wanted to jump in, Tina, I believe we've reached our, thank you. Yes, we've reached an hour and a half now. So I think I would like to let people go now and continue on their day. Thank you to everyone to participate in this conversation. Thank you to the attendees to taking the time to listen to this discussion. And hopefully these recommendations and information have been useful to you, and you can bring it to your own community to improve people, not just yourself, but the people around you. So thank you again to the panelists, and have a good evening.